here today on another episode of Gravity Podcast with the CEO of the Columbus Partnership, Kenny McDonald. And Kenny, boy, it's great to have you on. I was thinking about this as I was looking at your bio and just having seen you now wear multiple hats and in different roles in this community. It's awesome to have you in the role you're in. And there's just been so much good that has come out of the roles that you've played in this community that I'm honored to call you a friend and be a partner with you in the partnership and have a chance to talk with you today and go a little deeper with you.
Well, likewise. Even if you weren't one of my bosses, I'd be happy to do this anyway. I love it. Thank you.
I never really thought of you as somebody that I was the boss of, and I still don't. I still don't. So even if that has sort of any technical truth, I prefer to call you a friend. Because really, and maybe we'll just kind of hop in here, kind of a little out of format, but the partnership is, in my opinion, truly that. I mean, it is actually a partnership of people working side by side. And so that's kind of how I've always looked at you and your team.
Totally agree. Yeah. And it's a really good, instructive way to look at it so that it isn't just just another civic group. And that it has a real intention behind it. And, that's part of what makes it special.
Yeah, good. Well, we'll come back to the partnership. Let's go all the way back to sort of your earliest memories of childhood, and maybe you can just share with the audience, what being a kid was like for you. Talk a little bit about your family dynamics, how you were, raised, where you were raised, and all that fun stuff.
Well, it's I appreciate the question. I did grow up a little bit differently than maybe most folks. The first 7 years of my life was on a ranch in Montana, about 50 miles from anything that you would call a town. In fact, I started going to school in a one-room schoolhouse in a little place on the prairie called Cohagen, Montana, which really is a schoolhouse, and it used to be a bar. And a place to maybe buy cigarettes or something. That was a kind of a place that, a ranching community, right? And we had a ranch that my folks leased for as long as they could, and then they end up buying it over time. And we had a big, vast sheep ranch, so about almost 10,000 acres of land to roam around. So as a young kid, horses, three-wheelers and four-wheelers bashing around the prairie is a really special way to have, the young part of your life in your earliest memories.
Boy, sure is. I don't know if I've watched too much Yellowstone or I spent a little time in Montana myself, and it is really a special place, and that does sound like a beautiful environment to be raised in. Were your parents or grandparents? Was your family from Montana? How did everybody kind of get settled there?
So my grandfather and his brother came over from Scotland to Ellis Island, actually. And then there was a Scotch community in eastern Montana that they got on a train, if you can imagine, at 17, 18 years old, back in the early part of the 1900s, and went across the entire country and landed in what was even smaller community and more of a frontier at that time. And much like you see on Gangs of New York and stuff, like you went to a place called the Montana Bar, and there was guys in there that would make sure that the Scots that showed up actually got a place to work and got a good start, and they got them going, and it ended up, that's why you actually ended up having so much livestock and stuff out in that area. It's still a really big Scotch community because of that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so talk a little bit more about kind of what that was like for you. I mean, I don't want to get too far ahead, but I kind of see you in the role that you're in today, and I know you, kind of in this economic development, in this kind of leadership role. A lot of CEOs and suits, and right, like I'm like, okay, Kenny, comes from Montana. He, that's a world's away. So talk a little bit about kind of like, life for you at that point. Sounds like it's fun, beauty, nature, but what else? What were you into? What were your parents like? Kind of what was that kind of upbringing really like?
Well, my mom was a school teacher. She had taught all over Montana, including in the school that we went to, at least out there. But she taught at maybe 6 or 7 1-2 room schoolhouses across Montana after graduating college. And so she was a college graduate and actually, was a teacher, a professional, and had been married and widowed, and found my dad. He was a little bit older when they got married. He was about 38 years old. And he was a native of the area, right? So he had played basketball for the Montana Grizzlies and went off to World War II, and then came back, and then just became somebody who worked in the, if you will, the sheep business, selling wool and doing all the things you do, working for other people until he could get his own place. And so that was kind of our background. We ended up, my mom had 2 sons from her first marriage. My 2 oldest brothers, both have passed now. And then I had one more brother who is still alive, and he lives out in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And we grew up as ranch kids, right? I remember them saying that we're going to move to town and we're going to buy a home in the city. And the city is Miles City, Montana, which is kind of an outpost, literally an old cavalry outpost in eastern Montana. And my dad wanted us to have a home in there so that we could actually go to grade school and high school in Miles City and play sports and things like that. So I had 3 older brothers. I would say between working on the ranch and just playing ball, whether that was baseball, football, basketball, that was the totality of our life. Like, that's how we lived. And I was the youngest of them. And so I was either got really good or I got beat up, or a little bit of all the above at the same time. And that was our life around that whole community, and where our families deeply embedded in Miles City and in the counties around there in eastern Montana, because of my grandfather and their family and all my cousins and everything who still live there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So sports plays a big role. The brotherhood plays a big role. Tell me a little bit more about kind of any other, interest relative to academics, or anything that maybe was starting to come through that might, connect dots to where you are today, or to kind of where you start to go off into next, your studies, your academic period of life.
Well, I mean, really a typical kind of small town guy. I mean, sports was probably the priority over everything. And I really wanted to play college sports of one, or either football or basketball. Ended up getting some scholarships in both of them to smaller schools, like NAIA type of schools, Division III kind of things. But ended up choosing to play basketball at a place called Dickinson State University, which is in the far western edge of North Dakota, which is about 3 hours from where we grew up. And I always tell people I went to play basketball and also got a business degree in the process. And had a great time doing it. Like, I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's a school of maybe 2,500, 3,000. And even there, it was, I would call it, we joked that it was kind of advanced high school, right? And we were still, sports as a priority, academics were, something we did. I was a good student. And it was never really difficult for me. But really, until I went to graduate school, I wouldn't say that I was I didn't have any kind of real academic focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And really the focus was on sports. I mean, even thinking, I'm assuming, about career or any of that, it was still just sort of hyper focused on this athletic piece, which makes sense. I mean, when you talk about kind of small town and certainly, I think a lot of, men and I know in my family, like sports still is a big focus. I mean, my wife often jokes because I've got 3 boys that, sometimes will sit at the dinner table and she literally just doesn't have anything to add to the conversation. Right. And she's actually pretty damn knowledgeable about sports, but like
you have to be.
We go deep and and it could be all day, every day if we let it. So sometimes it is. So I get that. And I am a little curious to hear more about kind of the experience. You're playing college sports. You're part of the team. What was it about kind of the environment of sports of being on that team that was so kind of energizing for you?
Well, I never played individual sports. I always played team sports, and I don't remember a team I was on where I wasn't the captain of this or that, and sometimes I was one of the better players, and other times I was just for whatever reason quarterback on the football team and stuff like that. I just sort of gravitated towards being in charge, probably because I wanted to control everything or have the ball in my hands or something most of the time, and so. I reflect that that's still something that's sort of in my psyche. Um, I will say I do. That's why I'm such a big believer that not only kids should play sports as a way to get socialized. It's not the thing, but I would say being part of a team, being part of something that teaches you to work with others and to accept the things that they're great at and you're not, and vice versa, is just something that got ingrained in me. And in fact, I would say there's probably a 95% chance I was going to be some sort of a coach, history teacher, something like that. And it never really occurred to me until I got to maybe being a junior or senior in college, like, okay, what do I really want to do? And I had some really great mentors, and my dad actually had me talk to some people that he respected. It's interesting what conversations in your life stick out from so long ago. And he had me talk to this lawyer back in my hometown, and I said, I don't really want to own a business directly, but I'm really interested in it. I saw the good things and the failings maybe of where I grew up, because it's a tough place. It's kind of a hard life ranching. You're on the plains of eastern Montana. Most people don't have a ton. They're putting together 2, 3, 4 things to make a living. And there's rural poverty. And we saw all the effects of that stuff even growing up. And I knew that I wanted to be part of a community, right? That was really important to me. And it didn't matter exactly which one. I just knew that was something powerful to me. And so this guy was saying, well, there's things you can get a law degree, and that opens up some doors for that kind of thing in your future. And it ended up that through a basketball connection, I got the opportunity to go to grad school at Georgia Southern, of all places. So, a foreign country for a kid from eastern Montana to go to the deepest part of the South. Through a family connection and a basketball connection, I actually went to work for the NCAA rep at Georgia Southern, and their family ended up being the head of the public administration program. That's how I got a master's in public administration. So I would say, again, like, the opportunity led where the academics went. And that began my journey beyond Montana. And, first time I crossed the Mississippi was when I drove to go to graduate school.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I kind of want to come back to the sports piece for a second, because having done, over 100 and whatever, 20, 30 podcasts now. There is a theme. There's a lot of themes, but one of them is kind of the impact that playing sports has had on people's lives and on their careers. And it's a funny thing because I don't think it has to come through sports. It could come through any sort of like focused effort, but it does seem to be a big part of our culture. And you talked about team, being captain of the team. Certainly, there's relationships that are formed that allow for openings. Right, people get to kind of see the kind of quality of a human being, a kid, a young person, right, and they want to help them and support them, or there's some sort of common bond, like a fraternal, like, hey, you're right. And a network, really, right? And I'm kind of curious, like, to back up on the leadership piece, because it makes perfect sense that you would be the captain of the team and knowing what you do now, right? I mean, you are in really every sense the quarterback of the community in your role. So, do you think that was something that was sort of like a natural, like in your genetic makeup, to be a leader, to be the guy that raises the hand to say, I'll step up? Was that part of something that was role modeled for you, taught to you? Tell me a little bit more about why you think you were that guy at that, at an early age.
Well, I think part of that is if you have older siblings, you first of all, you look up to them and you're following them, but you want to be as good as them. You want to be on the court with them, right? And you have to work a little bit harder, and you get a little bit more advanced. You're playing with the older kids, if you will, right? And that forces one thing. I was also thinking that as you were saying that, I had some really instructive things in my life as we used to go to this basketball camp in Eastern Washington, Northwest basketball camps, Christian basketball camps, and they were really tough. And so they're noted basketball camps, NBC camps. A lot of the famous players out in Gonzaga and stuff went through some of that stuff. And you got a notebook when you went. You had all these, sayings, and you had all this leadership, coaching. And my brother and I were actually talking about this not that long ago, that how instructive that was. Like, it showed you what you can do. And then of course you have coaches along the way that take you aside and kind of show you how to be the leader. Like, in football, I think I was a freshman or sophomore, and I was again playing with the older kids. And this guy says, taught me how to actually use my voice. He said, you walk in, they're all bigger than you, they're older than you, but you got to take command. They're looking to you for direction, and you got to at least pretend like you know what you're doing, and sound like you know what you're doing, and you'll be surprised how far you can get. And so, little conversations like that, it's interesting what you can pick out and say, I wonder if I use that in a good way or a bad way as I get older, and how that stuff sort of sticks with you. And I think part of it is inherent, and part of it you have the opportunity to learn if you take it.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. It might be kind of it's probably a good combination of all those things, right? Because you got to have some, I think, and maybe we're all born to lead, but we don't, get shown the way and or take advantage of the opportunities. But, it seems like some people are more naturally inclined to find themselves in that position. And, it sounds like you're one of those people. So tell me a little bit about, kind of how sports keeps opening doors for you, off to graduate school now, and, really kind of taking what sounds like a fairly big leap to leave the comfort of the environment you've now lived in your whole life and, kind of get into something pretty different than, what you've been up to.
Well, I want to back up to one thing, which is the reason that neither my brother or I became, ranchers ourselves or stayed in the agricultural community and stuff is it's tough. It's, talk about a tough business where, you're hoping, praying it rains and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think my dad must have told us a million times, you don't want to do this. Go get an education.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Go see the world, get out there. He loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Even later in life, he asked, well, why didn't you guys do this? I said, well, basically we listened to you. And,
yeah. That's funny.
So when I went off, I wanted to go to graduate school. I was probably anxious, but excited to do this. I loaded up my car with everything I owned, which wasn't a whole lot, and some cassette tape decks, drove across the country. And, I really didn't know what I was getting into. And it ended up being a really special place for a bunch of different reasons. First of all, the exposure to the diversity that you had in South Georgia in every way was something that you just can't get if you're growing up in Eastern Montana or you're in North Dakota. So, Georgia Southern is you're about an hour away from Savannah, Georgia. In fact, I took a bunch of my classes at Savannah State, which is a historically black college, and long conversations with some of the professors there really started to form, the way I think about diversity, and some of the things that I'm passionate about bringing to communities were formed when I was maybe enhanced when I was there on some things that I knew, but I didn't have much exposure to. And just some really special people that worked in criminal justice, and some of the professors that I had down there really changed my life in a couple of years in terms of what I wanted to do, and ended up actually getting me into economic development through an internship. That's actually, the pathway to what I would say the second part of my life beyond sports, which was economic development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I definitely want to kind of circle back around some of the issues around diversity and some of the things that we're tackling as a society today, and how that experience, served you well to be in the position you're in now. But let's kind of, continue to follow this thread. You kind of start to get an economic development bug, and talk a little bit about kind of what is it about that has you curious or energized or starting to really, move in this path away from sports and into something that's, I'm sure there's tons of, correlation, as we've already discussed, right? The competitive aspect, the teamwork, the leadership. I mean, it's all probably there, but, in a lot of ways it's in a very different medium. So talk a little bit about, why economic development.
So my advisor, who I was really close to, said, I've got the internship for you. I mean, you love business, you want to be part of community. It's not boring, like it's different every day. And I'm going to, suggest you go take this internship with the Savannah Economic Development Authority, which ended up being, not only an ordinary economic development group, but really one of the best in the country. So it's still actually, and from our peer group here in Columbus, you wouldn't think of Savannah being, a peer group, but their economic development team has always been phenomenal, and they have this long history. And so I got the opportunity to work for, first of all, a great group of people at a very high level at what they did. Right, so I jumped right into something that was pretty special. And then I was just kind of, I still am amazed the rooms that I'm in, right? So I go to work for these guys, and you're with the mayor of Savannah, you're with the county commissioners, you're hosting the governor, you're hosting CEOs and clients on a regular basis from the community and from around the world that are coming. And you look around sometimes and you think, I'm some kid from Eastern. What am I doing in this room, right? And I get to be part of the conversation and get a hand in doing some small thing, or maybe having a bigger role in helping this happen. And so it's actually exhilarating, right? So it's like there's adrenaline to it. There's there's that high that you would get from winning a game by winning a project, or competing with another community for something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, it's a team.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, most of the team you don't control at all.
Yeah.
You've got a bunch of actors, and you don't get to bench anyone or put anybody in the game. Like you're taking the field with the players you have, and you're trying to maximize it. And it's addicting. I will say that for a period of time, the two worlds were really overlapped a lot, because particularly I played basketball, right? So the basketball world, the network of basketball coaches and people that played the sport and stuff, even if you were at a lower level like I was, you end up being connected, just a couple of notes away from anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel the same way after working in economic development for, the second half of my life, if you will, that I'm connected to every community, and I can go to almost any place in the country or even in the world and find an economic developer as if we're playing a game of pickup basketball.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk the same language all the time. So there's lots of corollaries of stuff, the things that make me really passionate about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I also, what I'm hearing is just kind of the value that you have and the experience that you've had in being part of community, being part of a network, right? Which is sort of the same thing, right? That whether it be sports, or maybe Montana sports, basketball specifically, economic development, or our partnership, there's community there, and that is super important to
Absolutely
learn, grow, fall, support each other, right? Create, collaborate. You have to be around people that either understand you, who know what it's like to do what you do. And in fact, this is sort of like the reason that I have this podcast, is to try to help people in the community navigate, learn, go on to do things like you're doing. And so I just hear that kind of constant thread coming through of the value that community and network, and being a part of something, belonging to something, is really played in your life.
And also just trying to raise the bar all the time, right? I'm motivated, and some of it's competitiveness, and some of it's just really curiosity about, wow, like I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know, communities did that.
Mm-hmm.
I know when I first joined the crew in Savannah, I had no idea of the apparatus in every city in the world, effectively, that exists just below the surface. And it's these teams of people that are working like crazy to make sure that they're building an economy, they're improving things, and they're professionals at it. Like there's people who do this. That was maybe one of the things that got me most excited. Was it was like a hidden treasure. I mean, I thought you either went to work for the government, and you became part of the official government, or you became, went into work in business or something, which is how I grew up. My family, my dad was a businessman, effectively. And I never even knew anybody that worked in an office. So even that was kind of a big step to work in an office. And so, it was a big leap, but I just was lucky, by the way.
Yeah.
That people took up for me and gave me opportunities to jump in.
Yeah, I'm wondering, just sitting here, kind of thinking about you and this path that you've been on, and I'm wondering how much of kind of the fact that you had not been exposed to being in an office or the business community in a traditional sense, how much of the kind of ranch life and you being sort of kind of conditioned that way. Um, and I'm kind of making assumptions here, but like what feels very sort of grounded and wholesome and focused on um, you know, uh, relationships, right?
Right.
How much of your kind of you know conditioning growing up on a ranch helps you today, or as you started to get into this career, that you're not somebody who's like so corporate raised, their
Yeah.
entire lives, right? Like there's some relatability, there's some ability to have maybe compassion or a more holistic view because you
But
are coming from that angle.
I would even, the way I look at it is, um, it's a huge advantage, in my opinion. Right? I used to have anxiety about it. Again, do I belong here? Do I should I be in this room? Um, and you quickly understand. Everybody's coming from a different angle. The reason I call it an advantage is maybe twofold. One is you really bring different thinking to the table sometimes. Um, and that's why I think bringing people to your organization and to your community and to your processes that um, you're not doing them a favor to bring them to the table. They're that perspective they're bringing is truly the thing you need to hear, because maybe 80% of the table is going to hear you. You can hear the same thing. You're gonna hear what everybody knows.
Right.
What's the standard operating procedure or something. So I think it's a big advantage. And then I will say that's been a big advantage just in my career advancement, because I can remember there was a period of time where I became a consultant, a global consultant, actually helping companies move and decide where to put their operations in the world. That was my next step after Savannah. And I was a young guy who, if they needed somebody to go do something, even things that they thought were a grind, man, I was raising my hand. Like, you need somebody to go to Iowa, you need somebody to go, on that trip. I'm your guy. I'll take it, because I just want to go places. I want to see things, right? So selfishly, that was my motivation. But then I was with everybody, and I was, with the partners of the firm. They got to know me. I got exposure that I wouldn't have gotten had I not been quite as curious. And there's no way I would have been as curious if I'd have grown up in that lifestyle and in that environment and traveled all over the place and stuff. And so it's been very useful in an accidental way, maybe,
Yeah. Well,
advanced my
yeah.
career.
Yeah, I think so, and I can just speak from my own experience. I personally gravitate to people that aren't all one way, and that maybe are a little bit more approachable. And I don't know. I think that we probably need more of that in community and in business in particular, especially where you're talking about trying to solve problems together, right?
Right.
If you come at it kind of real rigid in one sort of mindset, it's going to be harder, really. I do think it's an advantage. Talk to me a little bit about, you mentioned that next step, and I want to get to how you arrive in Columbus and, eventually at the partnership. Tell me a little bit more about kind of how your career continues to advance to bring you here.
I've had these great mentors at every stop. And so in Savannah, I worked for some people that were super at their job, but they saw that I was pretty ambitious, and they suggested that I go work for this company in Greenville, South Carolina, called Fluor. And Fluor is one of the biggest engineering companies in the world, but they have like a special forces unit, if you will. There was about 30 people at that time that did corporate site selection. And when I work in Savannah and when here in Columbus, we still work with a community of people that do that work around the world. And like everything else, there's a small group of them. And I can probably name a couple hundred people that really do that for a living. And I've got to know them all personally. And got to do that for about 8 years of my life. And lived in Greenville, Spartanburg, but got to lead major corporate teams in China and all over the United States and Europe and Eastern Europe, finding locations for them to put their manufacturing operations, their office environments, their headquarters, negotiating all the incentives and stuff. So those were that period of my career was what created a global network for me of people that were kindred spirit, both the clients as well as all the communities that I worked with, whether they won the project or they didn't win the project. And I just got to know maybe hundreds and hundreds of people around the world who were doing what I wanted to do, which was ultimately help these communities reach their potential. I had a couple of additional stops. I mean, 9/11 was a big event in my life. I was actually on the West Coast. I was in San Francisco when the event happened on the end of a road trip. I was going to set up a California office for us, and I had a 6-month-old daughter at the time, and I thought, well, I'm traveling all over the place all the time. The world's changing. I've got to start thinking about, I really want to work for a community. And I left. About 6 months later, I left and went to Albuquerque, New Mexico, thinking we wanted to go back out west. I love that place. Wonderful community, very poor state, very different environment, even from anything out west that I was aware, in Montana or anything. Did that for a couple of years, and then I had an opportunity to come back to Charlotte. And for 7 years in Charlotte, I helped to be kind of the number 2 person for the Charlotte Regional Partnership, which is an economic development group for 16 counties in and around Charlotte. And that experience in Charlotte was a whole different ballgame. That was doing it at a fairly high level, recruiting business from around the world, going to Europe, multiple times a year to recruit German businesses, French businesses, and things like that. And again, really doing the work of it and getting exposure to a few things. And that ultimately led me to a call from Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah. And so that call comes in and what do you know about Columbus, Ohio? And I hear, this calling to, be a part of community, but what are you thinking when you hear, Columbus that time?
Well, so one thing that was in the back of my mind was I really do want to lead an organization, right? And much like a coach would or something, like, we sort of know where the good teams and the great programs are, and there's these coveted jobs. Most of them are in these mid-sized cities, by the way, mm-hmm. Charlotte, various places. Like that's really the, in basketball terms, that's the Kentucky and the Louisville and the UCLAs of economic development work, right? And so I really wanted to lead an organization. My wife is from Miami, Florida. She was not excited about a call from Columbus, Ohio. And I wasn't either. And really instructive why. I came up to Ohio twice a year, every year when I was in Charlotte, really to just talk to businesses about moving them to Charlotte, right? And to say, what are you up there for? Those places are going the other direction. The South is growing like crazy. And, getting ready to expand your business, come our way. And I was fairly successful at that.
Yeah.
I'm glad I wasn't as successful or as good as I look about some of my trips to Columbus.
Yeah, I guess if Columbus probably was thinking, well, if we can't beat him, we should, have him come on our team.
Well, so the Columbus market had a reputation for doing an analysis, launching a program, and then not really sustaining it and standing behind it for more than maybe 18, 24 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then it would get kind of distracted and go its own way. And it really never established a strong economic development brand or anything. And when I came up, I actually looked at it and said, first of all, the product is phenomenal. And you could see the potential, the unused potential that existed here, just as a physical product. And if you look at the talent that Ohio State produces and everything, you're right here and you have all these assets that aren't necessarily being leveraged. And then I had conversations with the business community, and I could tell in pretty short order that this was a little different, that the Columbus Partnership was deeply committed and over more than just a few years. Like, we want to be great at this. We think we can grow. But we need to go present ourselves to the world, and we need a team to do that. So we came up and we actually had a great visit. It was ComFest in the short north. I think the Women's World Cup was on. It was wild. Even the short north was not what it is today, but it was still fun. Yeah. And my wife was like, let's give this a shot. Mm-hmm. And that started our journey now 12 years in to Columbus.
Yeah, Kenny, I'm going to just fast forward a little bit because there's a lot I still want to talk to you in the time we have left, talk to you about. But, you end up assuming the role you're in now. You worked through One Columbus, which I'm actually trying to remember what it was called before.
Columbus 2020.
Columbus 2020, which actually says we did a good rebrand because I was well aware of that and couldn't remember what it was called. But Columbus 2020, One Columbus, there was a lot of engagement with the partnership. I mean, those two organizations worked hand in hand, and you were always, a presenter and a very, integral part of the partnership. You've since stepped into be the CEO. And I'm kind of curious, kind of how you would describe that transition, and also like want to start getting into all that's been going on at the time that you step in, right? I mean, this is not normal times, and maybe there's no such thing anymore, but certainly we've had, tremendous heightened awareness around racial tensions, still do. There's been a lot in the community that has to be dealt with beyond just the economic development piece, that in this role, we as a community are attempting to, build a prosperous community for all, right? And so I would love to hear a little bit about kind of that transition and the time specifically in which you've had to step up into that role.
So I would say the transition in our work started at the end of the decade prior to the pandemic, right? I think we had a very successful decade. We achieved what we set out to when I moved up here. And we were actually accomplishing what so many organizations were envious of, where we're winning projects and, adding jobs, and we were growing at a faster pace than our region had ever grown. And yet there was this sort of growing dissatisfaction in the communities, plural, around both jurisdictional, governmental communities and communities of minority communities, rural communities across our region. And also a growing dissatisfaction among the people that were practicing it, which was our team, which was, we're accomplishing a lot, but we still aren't moving some of these numbers Just, an easy one is African American unemployment, right? You know, back when it was at normal times, a 4% unemployment rate with the rest of the population, still 9-10% in the African American community. So as a practitioner who's always trying to do stuff better, our whole team sort of has that, you know, that makes us curious and makes us motivated, and we're going to figure that out. So when we launched sort of the next decade's plan, I think our call to the community was, we've got to work on the stuff that is the enabling systematic things that are going to cause us not only to grow, but to solve some of these other numbers that we want to diminish or decrease with equal vigor. And we're asking for infrastructure to be done differently. We're asking for transit. We're asking for workforce programs to work a little different, for hiring practices to look a little bit different. And we weren't quite articulating that. The one thing we got dead right was that we didn't want to be the biggest community, the richest community. We wanted to be the most prosperous place in the country, meaning we wanted to grow, because that's just part of being good. If you're not growing mentally, physically, personally, organizationally, community-wise, then you're going the other direction. I firmly believe that. But if you're not progressing the practice of what you're doing to account for this nuanced things, these things in the middle that are making these systematic changes, you're also just going to keep adding trophies, but you're never really going to win the championship. And so we articulated that right, but we weren't quite saying, we weren't, by the way, saying the word race or racism. We weren't addressing, things as directly as saying, hey, the Black community has a real inequity here. Or, you know what, this rural community has not had the access they need. They don't have the broadband access, or, what are we doing about that? And the pandemic gave us a great excuse to actually to break that. Simultaneously, the transition is going on in the partnership, maybe in lots of different ways. Partnership's growing. There's more CEOs at the table, you being one of them. And fast forward, at the end of the pandemic and for the last 12 months, we had an opportunity to work with Intel on one of the largest projects in the world, which is, is interesting in a lot of ways, but it's also a forcing mechanism for us to break the final eggs and say, okay, how are we going to make this omelet going forward? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a weird way to say that, how that transition worked. I took the reins 21 days into that. We announced the Intel project, which brought the area a lot of attention, state a lot of attention, even the country. And it's been a whirlwind to say, okay, let's get our footing after pandemic, after Intel, and actually after this economic and social transition that we're in. Mm-hmm. And maybe we're still getting our footing, but we're building what I think is the modern equivalent of an economic development platform, which addresses all these subjects. So I get more fired up now because we're going to do this differently, but I think we're going to do it way better.
Yeah. Well, I was actually just at a conference yesterday in Palm Beach with a guy who came up to me, just introduced himself, from Silicon Valley, knew I was from Columbus, and wanted to talk about the Intel deal. And this, it's obviously, it's just on people's radar. And his question to me was, why Columbus? How did Columbus win that deal? And better than anybody, but I think, what I said to him was, from what I know, this wasn't our first attempt at a deal like that. And so it didn't just happen. It happened over many, many years of laying the groundwork and coming in second and third place so that we were ready and able to actually do what it takes to win the deal. And there's many other factors involved too. But, I am kind of curious to hear a little bit more from your perspective on one, why Columbus, and two, what does that deal do to transform this community?
Well, lots of reasons why Columbus, but I will say professionally, you're totally right. You've pursued things and lost them, right? And I always tell our team, we win and we learn. We never lose. And opportunities have a way of coming back around. And we work with Foxconn. They actually wrote a book about the project. And we were going to, I was given a copy of this the other day. But, I was reading about that effort, which was this huge opportunity about reshoring that they tried to do. And, I'll give them all the credit in the world that they cracked the ice on some things. And we learned a lot by working with them at a global level. We learned a lot by competing for the Amazon HQ2 project and the kind of diversity that we were going to have to bring to the table and how to approach projects, big and small, going forward. We've done that. And by the way, talk about a team. There really is probably hundreds of people behind the scenes that actually help make this happen, starting with the governor and his team, and Jobs Ohio and their team, and probably the two most notable ones that did a bunch of the heavy lifting, the New Albany team, the New Albany company team, and all these people who just did heroic things for the last 12 months. I will say that there was a small group that would have kind of motivational calls and said, you know what, we're going to do it. We're whatever this takes, we're going to figure out how to make this work. And there's zero chance that if we had not worked for 10 years and failed and won and lost and all the things we've done, that we would actually have the fortitude to get through everything that we went through on that project. And by the way, an ongoing pandemic in the middle of it, and all the challenges going on swirling around us while we were trying to do it, wasn't the only thing we were doing. We had a record year above and beyond Intel at the same time, right? So it just shows that you can actually accomplish great things when you have a team, a network, and you've won and lost together, and you've learned from it, right? And you've taken the time to learn from it. And then you also got people that want to force you to think big, right? My greatest fear, thinking about this morning, Brett, about 100 years ago, we built the Lubbock Tower, we built the shoe, built the airport, and whoever those folks were had less resources than us, probably a lot less data, a lot less insight into the future. And they did some big things that we've enjoyed and get to live off of. And are we going to be as bold as people were 100 years ago or 50 years ago in some of the assets that were created? And we got to keep thinking big. So for me, the Intel project is more of a symbol. It's going to bring all kinds of great things that I could go into great detail about, but it's more of a symbol of it's possible.
Yeah.
And then if we do it right, we open opportunities for our Black community and for our Hispanic community and for our immigrant community and for communities all across Ohio to benefit from it, then man, we've really done something.
Yeah. So that's great. I'm glad you kind of, landed there, because I was going to circle back around and talk about, how we actually achieve prosperity, right? Because there's this focus on economic development, but then, we're also talking about, Black community, minorities, rural, right? There's all sorts of, political divides. I mean, it's a complex puzzle, and the economic development piece is often kind of seen as sort of separate, and I don't think that it is. In fact, I have found in my own experience, and there's a lot of debate about this, that business is a powerful platform to solve world problems, and at least problems in a community. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of your vision for how we do not lose sight of the issues outside of, landing the big Intels of the world, and how that will actually go hand in hand with solving, the problems that we're aiming to solve.
I think that maybe start with a couple premises. One is that people actually want very consistently the same things, all over the world. They want opportunity for themselves, for their families. They want to live in good places, safe places. And they kind of want to just get on with life, right? Without being held down. And like they want the opportunity to actually be all that they can be. And but at a basic level, they just want a chance to succeed, right? And so I kind of come into this with that basic thought that I've seen it all around the world. And so I have that always in the back of my head. The second premise is what got us here is not going to get us where we need to go, right? Like we really have to put some baggage down, and we also have to pick up some burdens that others have been carrying, particularly as leaders in the community. We have to remove those obstacles and relieve those burdens so that others actually have an opportunity that they just simply haven't had before. And I think I don't really separate economic development from any of that. As I'm with you, I think business is a force for good in the world. Capitalism is a force for good in the world, maybe one of the greatest in the history of the world. And yet we have to regulate it, manage it, and manage ourselves and hold each other accountable in our communities so that force for good is channeled in a way that really does lift everybody up. I've seen it the last several years like I've never seen it before, meaning people are starting projects with that premise. They're not adding that on to the end of them.
Right.
And it makes all the difference in the world if you say, we want to build this project, in your case, a physical product. If you're a community builder, we're going to build this community or organization or whatever. We're going to start with the premise that diversity is a great value and inclusion is a great value, and that we're going to have to work our tail off to break some of the systems that have led to the inequities, right? So all three things need to be addressed. And if we start our conversation with that, it's really interesting that we're going to get a lot farther than if we just tack it on as an also check the box. We also have to do that. Mm-hmm. Like, I think it should be at the heart of what we're trying to do. And you can break that down by race. You can break it down by type of community or any other way. I just feel like I see that a lot with the way companies are approaching projects, communities are. And I got to believe this is going to start making a huge difference as we go forward, and probably fairly quickly. I'm not one that actually thinks that it needs to take decades to accomplish all that we think can be accomplished in this arena.
Yeah, I hope you're right. And I tend to share your optimism, and maybe it's in part because it's informed by what I've seen over the last few years, that I actually, and kind of giving, Alex some credit for this too. I really was super inspired and kind of re-energized with the partnership when I saw how people came together, after the George Floyd murders and through the pandemic to really elevate the issues at hand and get outside of the economic development mindset or the corporate mindset, the mindset of our own businesses. And it's always been about community, and it's always been about things more than just business. But that was a moment where I felt like there was some real leadership, where people were really coming out and standing for what they believed in, and then getting activated. And what I'm even more encouraged by is, and listen, I sit here as a white privileged man, So, I know that there's a lot of work to be done, but I'm encouraged by the work is continuing. It doesn't feel like people have, taken their foot off the gas like this, that we know there's still a long way to go. And a lot of great people are doing great work. And so, I guess, maybe I'll just, kind of wind down and turn it over to you for final thoughts. But when I hear your story today and just knowing you and seeing what's taken place over the last few years, I do feel very comforted in knowing that there's leadership that is sincerely thinking uh, big, broadly, and holistically about how we can all win. And because of that, I also think this doesn't have to take forever. So anyway, I'll thank you for that, and I'll kind of let you react to that and share any final thoughts as we start to wrap up.
Well, I'll just go back to this idea of team and the network that is required. So, no one entity, person, or anything is going to make that big of a difference. Although each active individual leadership matters. And what I'm comforted is you go around a community like Columbus and you see people being vulnerable and saying, you know what, I don't know what I don't know. And I want to have a conversation about it. I want to expand my network. I want to learn what that looks like. They're doing it inside their companies. They're changing their practices internally. Sometimes like small practices that are sort of unlocking big opportunities. Doing things that financially or otherwise actually just help people build a bridge to a better future and are doing things differently. And I'm seeing that on a pretty consistent basis now, which is actually the most exciting thing, and broadly. And then I see just this unbelievable network of government elected nonprofit academic leaders who are partners in this, right? That are bringing their processes to the table. They're opening up and saying, you know what, we don't quite understand what business needs or what the challenges are, and there's an exchange of ideas and vice versa. And I get really excited. Like the luxury of this job is the wide angle lens of all the leadership across the members of the partnership, first and foremost, the business community, and then all these other leaders in our community who are willing to do some very difficult and uncomfortable things to try to achieve this vision. And by the way, people, I always talk about prosperity being, I don't know exactly what it looks like. I almost know exactly what it doesn't look like.
Yeah.
It's right. Failing schools, it's challenged infrastructure, it's doing things the same way. That's not going to lead us to the point where we can legitimately stand and say we're more prosperous than someone else. Like we got a lot of work to do. So just incredibly grateful and motivated by conversations like this, Brad, and leaders like yourself, by the way, that are doing things that I want more people to know about it, because I think more people can model it and then build on the leadership and do it their own way. So I get really excited about spending time with all of you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kenny. And I love that kind of last piece about sometimes, it's more important to know what it doesn't look like. And, we might not have all the answers, but we know what's not working and what we can't keep doing. And sometimes, maybe that's the best place to start. So, hey, thanks again. This has been a joy for me to get to hear your story and get to know you even better in a different way. And I'm sure our audience will love it. And thanks again for the partnership and friendship, and lots more to come.
Right. Really appreciate it.